Here we are in Cancun, Valentine's Day, talking about sweet things. Does it get any better? Well, the old narrative was brush your teeth twice a day, see your dentist twice a year, and avoid sweets. Well, life is about to become a little sweeter because now we have sweets that are actually good for your teeth. We're talking about xylitol. Xylitol is a versatile sweetener. Those of you who have the little bags can pull out your packet of XyloSweet. This is xylitol. This is pure xylitol. Also pull out your little rubber eraser. We're going to use that to represent the xylitol molecule. Xylitol is a versatile sweetener, can be used in many of the same applications that regular sugar is used. One for one, same sweetness as sugar. Xylitol is found in nature, in fruits, vegetables, berries, but commercially it's not practical to squeeze xylitol out of a raspberry. There's very little free xylitol there. Xylitol has to be processed from a xylene hemicellulose material down to the pure xylitol. And it doesn't matter what the starting material is. It can be corn cobs, it can be northern hardwoods, it could be coconut shells. The final product is what we're interested in. Xylitol is xylitol. Xylitol is a normal metabolic intermediate in human metabolism. We produce about 1 tablespoon's worth of xylitol every day. And of course, xylitol has some interesting health benefits. Why xylitol? Because it tastes good and it works. Xylitol helps to prevent tooth decay and upper respiratory infections when used appropriately. Because xylitol is low calorie and low glycemic, its early use was as a premium sweetener in the diabetic diet. You see it by the blood sugar response. Xylitol has an extremely low glycemic index of around 7 with glucose as a standard of 100. If our system is still metabolically flexible, insulin will kick in as the blood sugar rises to drop the blood sugar back to normal, sometimes even overshooting the goal and going below baseline, whereas xylitol has a nice, steady, slow release, a trickle of energy. And because of this, xylitol was used and is used as a supplemental energy source in IV nutrition for patients with impaired glucose tolerance, such as burn patients. And the athletes and bodybuilders got a hold of this idea, and xylitol articles started showing up in my muscle magazines. So let's pass these out around. You can take a look at these and make sure they end up with Dr. Mike T. Nelson right over here, because he has expressed special interest in my swimsuit edition. Health really begins up front here in the nose and mouth. These are the beginnings of the entire digestive respiratory system, really portals or gateways to the entire body. Everything we breathe and everything we ingest. The big problems in these areas can be biofilm diseases. Biofilms are highly organized structures of communities of bacteria. Very tenacious, very difficult to attack with antimicrobials. Xylitol helps to disrupt biofilms and enhances our natural defenses against them. The major dental problems, tooth decay, gum disease, even a bad bite, are at least somewhat diet related. And small dietary additions can make a big difference. Some on the list there that we're familiar with, fluoride, protein components, especially amino acids such as arginine, that help to keep the pH higher, keep a non-acid environment, and certain vitamins, vitamin C, of course, for structural matters, and we'll hear more about the fat-soluble vitamins A, D3, K2, vitally necessary for proper development of jaw bones and the teeth. And in that list, we can add xylitol as with a small addition to our diets. We can make a big difference, as seen in the xylitol studies. Really dramatic reductions in tooth decay. These are all long-term trials in real-life situations. I'd like to point out the Turku studies, number 1 and 2. That really started the modern era of xylitol dental research, and these are really amazing research studies. If you get a chance to look at the entire breadth of that, you'll be amazed by what was accomplished. And we have here in our audience two of the prominent people that really started the entire xylitol research dental connection, Dr. Kauko Mäkinen, Dr. Lisa Mäkinen, and we have something for them. Go ahead, stand up. So, stand up. Thank you. And what they did was just astounding. They took all the sugar out of the diet, all the accessible sugars, and replaced it with xylitol. So people were on a xylitol diet for 2 years. And you could see the dramatic drop in new tooth decay. Well, that was sort of it was criticized as being an impractical strategy because xylitol is rare and expensive. So what they did, they didn't stop there. They went on the Turku #2 study where they just said, let's not try to replace the entire diet. Let's just use a small amount of xylitol appropriately targeted after meals and snacks. And they found that with a very small amount of xylitol, they can get nearly the same effect as replacing all the sugar in the diet. And all the subsequent studies really led off of, from that, and getting the same reduction, similar reductions in tooth decay in different populations, all using a small amount of xylitol as a dietary addition. What does it mean for us? It means safe, effective, convenient, enjoyable, and portable protection, something that we can take with us because everybody needs a guard at the gate. Our teeth are always undergoing a tug-of-war situation between damaging and protective factors. Xylitol helps block the tooth-damaging factors, the acid and the sticky acid germs. They love an acid environment. They secrete acid. They live in acid. They crowd out the harmless or even beneficial bacteria and create a nasty environment. Xylitol helps block that out, while at the same time xylitol is promoting protective factors, stimulating saliva. Stimulated saliva has a higher pH, less acid. Xylitol promotes remineralization by being a carrier for calcium and getting it into the deeper layers of the teeth. And xylitol helps suppress the nastiest of the acid-secreting bacteria, such as strep mutans. We'll mention a few things about sweeteners in general. Two main categories of sweeteners are the bulk sweeteners. You can see these have weight, volume. You can make solid products out of it. Here, xylitol is categorized as a bulk sweetener. In other words, about the same sweetness as regular sugar. So sugars and sugar alcohols are in that category. Xylitol considered a sugar alcohol on food labels, a bulk sweetener, as opposed to the intense sweeteners, which are extremely sweet. You have little packets of that in your bag also. But you can see where you would need, let's say, a half a cup of a bulk sweetener. If you're making a pitcher of lemonade, you would just use a tiny pinch of a high-intensity sweetener. This one about 600 times sweeter than sugar. Some of them are thousands of times sweeter than sugar. It would be even difficult to measure them or even find them. Sugar by other names on food labels. If you see sugar, it means sucrose sugar. That's a familiar, ordinary, common table sugar that we're used to. If it says sugars with an S, that's the sum total of the mono and disaccharides. The common ones in our diet are mostly glucose and fructose. Syrups and the disaccharides are just two monosaccharides linked together. These are altogether are considered sugars, or the simple carbohydrates. Sugar syrups, unless it says sugar-free, are basically sugars dissolved in water. Corn syrup is an example, mostly glucose dissolved in water. And more recently, we've become familiar with high fructose corn syrup, where some of the glucose is converted to fructose. That's a very common ingredient now. I also put starch and maltodextrin in this category of sugars because they break down very readily on the teeth into sugar. Here's a quick chart showing where xylitol fits in. These are the monosaccharides up here, the disaccharides down here. Xylitol is considered a sugar alcohol on food labels, or a polyol. Polyols are close chemical cousins of sugars. Basically, polyols are reduction products of sugars, and polyols in turn can be oxidized back to sugar. So polyols tend to be less reactive and less harmful to the teeth than their sugar counterparts. You'll notice that xylitol is in the column of the polyol family, but it's also in this row of the more uncommon sugars, but necessary sugars that contain 5 carbon atoms. If we look at our molecular model of xylitol, which we're representing by our eraser, you'll notice that it's somewhat flexible, and you'll notice there's no, it's sort of linear, but it can sort of mimic shapes of other shapes. It also has no attachment points. There's no highly reactive double bond to oxygen where sugar would have an aldehyde group or a ketone carbonyl group. The xylitol is relatively non-reactive. And that means that xylitol doesn't link up readily with other sugars or with amino acids. It doesn't glycate with amino acids. Even within the polyol family, xylitol is a little different, a little smaller molecule, for example, than sorbitol. If we take out our other molecular models, we have the smooth ones, the maltose representing a maltose disaccharide. You can snap those apart and you have 2 glucose molecules, monosaccharides. Snap them back together and you've just built a disaccharide. And also you have the sucrose molecule, which has the glucose component, but also a bumpy model that we're representing fructose. You can think of berries, fruit sugar, that's your fructose moiety of sucrose. If you snap them apart, you have 2 monosaccharides, fructose and glucose. Put them together, you have sucrose. Sucrose sugar is the standard for comparison. Sugar substitutes try to duplicate the taste and some functional properties of sucrose. So if we're trying to imitate sucrose, what's the point? Why not just use sucrose all the time if that supposedly has the best taste? What's wrong with sucrose? Well, basically it comes down to problems of overconsumption. Overconsumption can create metabolic chaos, and too frequent use of sugars can create dental problems. Now, the American Heart Association tells us that we should limit our sugar consumption to this much per day, no more than this, right? But let's take a look at one of the common sources of more sugar. And I believe these are going to be outlawed soon in New York City. You won't be able to get those, but how much is in one of those? We've got the 6 and we're adding on. Oh, we're already over our limit. Look at that. And keep going. Oh, there's more. There's more. Keep going. You're going to finish that, aren't you? Before lunch? Before lunch? Keep look, there's more. There you go. And some people do that every day and then some. So what does that do? The overconsumption can create metabolic havoc. We become metabolically inflexible, known as the metabolic syndrome, a condition of prediabetes, insulin resistance, impaired glucose tolerance. When you're looking at your fasting blood sugars, remember that that's a lagging indicator. There can be other things to watch out for, such as hypertension, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia. Check your waist size. Men, if you're approaching 40 inches, you could be in a little bit of trouble. I was going to have everybody measure their waist size, but I found that our tape measure needed recalibration, so we'll try to finish that before the show's over. The metabolic syndrome, a loss of metabolic flexibility, can lead to really serious problems: diabetes, heart disease, chronic inflammation, and premature aging. When we look at the pieces of the xylitol molecule, The xylitol molecule, you'll notice it's one piece, flexible, no attachment points. Look at the sucrose molecule. That one will snap apart, high energy bond, disaccharide bond holding it together. And the two pieces, let's think about an overload of the two moieties. You have the glucose part, an overload of that high glycemic, an overload of fructose, metabolic havoc. So for our metabolism, high loads of sucrose can be trouble. Dental-wise, we're looking at the number of exposures. How often is the sucrose molecule getting on the teeth? And why is that harmful? Because of energy. Snap your molecule apart, and that's the high energy bond. Bacteria can get energy from that. The pieces, the glucose and the fructose, can be metabolized into acid. They leave that as a waste product. They get more energy out of the monosaccharides. And if they're well fed, they can put the monosaccharides together, link them together into long chains of polysaccharides. And we'll see where this can become a problem, especially with regards to biofilms. Now, polysaccharides can be inside of the cell, and we have an example of that. Intracellular polysaccharide. You'll see these sugar molecules all linked together, and there's a well-fed sugar-eating cell. It's full of food storage. An analogy in the human body would be glycogen storage. We store so much sugar as glycogen. If we get way too much sugar, we start storing it as fat, potentially. So the bacterial cells can store the excess sugar inside the cell as energy. Outside the cell, they can store more sugar. As you see, the sugar molecules link together. And what can that do? Well, it can make a sticky surface, and the bacteria cells start sticking together to each other. The polysaccharides is forming a matrix, a sticky, slimy, protective biofilm matrix. Starts forming a network. Let's start assembling our own biofilm matrix, which is going to look like a big mesh or net by the time we're finished with it. Take your glucose molecules, which you may have snapped together into a maltose molecule, the smooth ones, and snap them together with your partner towards the center. Just take that and pass it down and snap it together with the others to make a chain. And so let's say we're starting with glucose, which you can find in corn syrup, or high fructose corn syrup is just corn syrup where a portion of the glucose molecules have been converted to fructose. But now we're building polysaccharide. We're building a glucose polymer. By the time we get these together in the center, we've made maltodextrin. If we keep expanding this, we will make a starch molecule, a polysaccharide, a sugar polymer, which in solution really looks something like this. And you can see how this starts becoming a meshwork or a net. We can do that with glucose or fructose, glucans or fructans on the teeth. Just an aside, while we're waiting for all this to be assembled, you can take out your packet of intense sweetener. It's the one that's not xylitol. And take a look at the ingredients. Call out the first ingredient that you see. What's dextrose? D-glucose, sugar. What's the second ingredient that you see? Call it out. Maltodextrin. What's maltodextrin? We just made one. It's a series of sugar molecules linked together. On the teeth, it falls apart back into sugar. So what's the last ingredient there? You have your intense sweetener. Again, it would be so small in a packet like that, you wouldn't be able to find it. So it's bulked up with a bulking agent like the sugar maltodextrin. So what you end up with is super sweetened sugar. So if your patients think that they're being sugar-free by sipping on this, they're wrong. They're sipping on a sugar solution. Granted, it's lower in calories because, oh look, it's 0 calorie. How is that possible since it has almost 1 gram of sugar 1 gram of sugar is 4 calories, right? No, the trick is almost 1 gram, 0.9999. They can round down to 0. They can round the 4 down to 0. Close enough. So just keep that in mind. If, especially your dry mouth patients, if they're sipping on something all day long, they think they're being sugar-free, they better check again. Because on teeth, it's all just sugar. And what xylitol does is help balance that damaging factor with the remineralization and increases the pH, gets that back into balance. Our teeth are always under attack. Let's fight the attack with xylitol. Because with time, biofilm becomes less acidic, less irritating, less inflammatory, less adhesive, and less harmful. It helps stop the acid attack and can even provide long-term protection. Oh, look at that. We're building our polysaccharide net, which we were going to follow up in the next program. So that gives you an idea how it's built. 1 sugar molecule at a time. Extracellular polysaccharide. Let's look at really key times to use xylitol. Tooth eruption. When the teeth are just coming in, the very best time to use xylitol. Because xylitol enhances early mineralization and it inhibits colonization by strep mutans. Now, what happens, we have a good example here of a bacteria cell that's been feeding on xylitol. It's full of xylitol instead of polysaccharide. What happens? Look at that. It couldn't digest the xylitol and spit it back out. So that's how xylitol helps disable the bacteria. Let's feed them something that they think is sugar, mimics sugar, looks like sugar, but they can't digest it. What's the best time to start? Early on. There's someone with a pacifier with xylitol in it. Xylitol in a tooth gel with calcium added. Mixed dentition. There's xylitol products that can be used at this time to protect the permanent teeth. Just as they come in, they're erupting into a clean xylitol environment to get long-term protection against tooth decay. Look for xylitol first on your food label. Xylitol is sweet enough to be the only sweetener in a product. It doesn't need artificial sweeteners to help it. How much, how often? The daily range for best effect is somewhere between 1 teaspoon and 1 tablespoon. It depends. It's all individually calibrated, but that's a good range. You might say the sweet spot for xylitol. Don't overdo a good thing. The first time you use xylitol, don't make lemonade, because a lot of xylitol in liquid on an empty stomach, for someone who has not built up some tolerance to it, it can have a laxative effect. Don't give it to dogs. Dogs can have an insulin reaction to xylitol, which will drop their blood sugar. Some points to remember: xylitol tastes good. It may help with weight control because it's low calorie, low glycemic. Can replace all or part of sugar in recipes. It's good for teeth and helps prevent tooth decay and ear infections. Let's turn it over to Shirley Gutkowski now, who will continue the idea of building that polysaccharide network to hold the biofilm together.